This week's interview was an absolute treat for me as I got to sit down and talk bass with one of my heroes, the incredible virtuoso Janek Gwizdala. Janek has toured and recorded with modern jazz legends such as Mike Stern, Randy Brecker and Pat Metheny and released multiple albums as a solo artist. He's also a high-profile educator and author with a huge online presence both through YouTube and his website. As a player, Janek is simply incredible, both as a traditional groove player and as an improvising soloist. From a soloing standpoint, Janek has developed a beautifully lyrical style of playing, and in this interview I delve into how he was able to nurture such a highly developed vocabulary on the instrument. We also talk in depth about practice in general, the value of transcription, and the impact of social media on modern music. So without further ado, let's join Janek as I sit down with him for some great bass chat. Janek Gwizdala, here we are.
What's happening? Here we aren't.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
6,000 miles separating each other, and it's like we're in the same room.
Yeah. How's things?
Things have made a big turning point. It's an interesting time to be doing this interview. Yesterday and today, I started uploading one song from each night of a tour we did a year ago. That we started on the 28th of February in 2020, and we didn't realize it was going to be the last time we got to play live music to an audience for over a year and
that's
counting
with Bob.
Now. With Bob Reynolds, exactly. Bob Reynolds, Rosalind Sirota, and Gene Coy, and we went through it just the same as everyone else did that was on tour at the time. I know Tim LaFave was like a day behind us in Europe with another band, and we were all going through it, and then we all got kind of screwed at the same time and had to come back to the States and cancel our tour. But it's been interesting. I'm kind of a bit of a hermit, to be honest. I don't mind being home. I'm not like the road guy. I did that for a really long time, playing 200-300 shows a year. And I've been kind of super happy not being the road guy. But listening back to this material that I'm posting on YouTube now, it really kicked. Maybe it was a 1-year thing, or it just really reminded me I might not be like the road guy, but I really miss this. And when you work on, I'm sitting here literally with manuscript transcription in front of me that I was working on late last night. When you're doing all this work still and have no outlet, it's now reached that psychological point where it's kind of crushingly a little bit depressing. I don't want to start out an interview with a depressing sentiment, but to answer your question honestly, it's a bit of a moment right now, and maybe not coming back for another year from now is quite a daunting prospect at the same time. So yeah,
it's not good. I look around. I mean, I've been quite lucky with doing what I'm doing because I can still keep working with that and doing stuff.
Right.
But my wife, she's a singer. Obviously, all her work's gone. I live on the Isle of Wight now, and it's very much a touristy kind of place with lots of, there's a lot of gigs there for, the people around here, but everywhere's shut down. I mean, I know everywhere's shut down, but especially the touristy kind of things. I mean, everywhere's boarded up. I mean, it's like a ghost town, from that angle.
Right.
And, every musician that I know is all, they've all got other jobs now. They're all, one's an ice cream man. They're all doing all kinds of things. And it's just one of those things. And, who knows how long this is going to go on. I mean, hopefully now that vaccines are there and stuff, hopefully it's all going to start up.
There's definitely hope. And I think we have some parallels there, you and I, working with our online businesses. We've been very fortunate to be in this space and to be able to continue to work. And my wife's a bass player, for instance, and her entire life was based around the gigging economy, which just disappeared overnight. So yeah, I think we're Yeah, and even like you said, things boarded up, and like Los Angeles is kind of turning into a little bit of a ghost town, a big ghost town. Maybe not as small as the Isle of Wight, but there's a lot of parallels there in terms of stores being boarded up. Although I did recently hear get word that there's a new jazz club opening up in LA. Which is amazing to hear in the middle of a pandemic. Like, who's betting on that right now? But God bless them. I mean, that we need it. Enough places have closed. So yeah, definitely some hope, some light at the end of the tunnel, I think. But I think psychologically tough on so many people. I'm always curious to hear what it's like in other countries, people who do like similar thing, or whether you're a working musician or whether you have an online business or not. I'm very curious to see how that manifests and how it plays out.
Yeah. Well, I want to get back to the start with you, because you're one of those guys that, I'm in fanboy mode, by the way, right now, because like honestly, I've followed you forever, and like, you wear a lot of different hats, as you just, you were just mentioning. I mean, you've got a bass player, you've got, and there's that. Sure. You're kind of like a super sideman kind of guy. You're a composer. I mean, to anybody that knows that's listened to you a lot, I mean, everybody knows that's a big part of your thing. But as well as that, you've got the online persona, which again is a separate skill set, really, and an author, because you've got a ton of books out, of which I've got which I've got a load,
Oh, come on, that's awesome.
And so you've got all of these things. So I want to get into all of those little bits, but
sure.
So you started out, I mean, going back, I think Lawrence Cottle was a big part of your development at the start, wasn't it? But how did you originally get into playing bass? Because you were, I mean, was it a thing that you thought, I'm going to play a bass? Or was there any moment where
There was one very specific moment, and it was all centered around Lawrence. It was Sunday lunchtime. I was playing drums. Like, I wanted to be a drummer. That was my thing. I was young, 14, 15 years old, and I loved the drums. And my buddy said to me, like, let's go to this gig in Croydon in South London, of all random places, at the Gun Tavern. And they had a typical Sunday lunchtime jazz gig, English pub vibe. And I was like, he said, you got to hear this bass player. I was like, what the hell do I care about a bass player? I play the drums, man. He's like, well, the drummer's pretty good too. And of course, it was one of Lawrence's best friends, Ian Thomas. And so he dragged me along, and that was it. That was Sunday lunchtime. And Monday, I went out and got a bass.
Right.
And that's literally it. From then until this moment, I haven't taken my foot off the gas.
So like that's ching moment.
Instantly. I still somewhere have he early days of bootlegging, like he had a little dictaphone, and my friend recorded the show, and I still have the cassette tape of that show. Like the first show I ever heard that was like, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life.
Wow.
So yeah, it was instant. Completely just took me over right away. And then Lawrence was, kind enough to, I lived in Mitcham, he lived in Streatham, like 4 minutes from each other, and he took me to every gig and session and just the hang. I was in that hang solidly for 2.5 years, or almost 3 years. Yeah, probably around 3 years, and learned everything. I got a dictaphone, a little cassette player, recorded everything. I have dozens and dozens of cassette tapes. And pubs used to close at 11. I don't even know what it is now, but like typically he would take me to a gig, and by 11:30 I'd be home, and 11:30 I'd put the headphones in and press play from what I just heard and start transcribing until 2-3 o'clock in the morning. So it would be like very fresh in my mind. See it live, record it, listen to it, transcribe it, learn it, and just did that for 2.5 years.
How old were you at that point?
I must have been 15, 16, something like that. Because I remember when I got my driving license, and the day I got it, Lawrence was like, big smile. He's like, it's payback time, motherfucker, like this. So I would drive him to gigs. He really did for like 1.5 years take me all over the place to see music that he was a part of, and great musicians, Jim Mullen and Nigel Hitchcock and Gerard Presenza, Mark Nightingale, Graham Harvey, Paul and Jeremy Stacey, like the best of the best English musicians. You know, a lot of the studio players, of course, that he was involved with, because the studio scene was still kind of happening in the mid-90s. It was kind of, I saw the tail end of that before it really died. Like jingles, when jingles were a thing that a band actually got in a room and recorded for the TV and the radio and stuff. So, yeah, it was super important. Really sort of no other, I couldn't imagine doing it any other way. And I got super lucky because that's obviously not something that's available to find someone of that stature who's willing to spend the time with you. You know, and at the same time, very, very importantly, he never gave me a lesson.
Oh, really?
Not a single piece of musical information did he ever tell me. I would ask him, "Oh, what's this chord in one of his, like, he played a lot of his music." It was great to see him as a band leader as well as a sideman. That was very inspirational in the beginning as well. A very important part of my growth as a musician. I would ask him. He said, "What is that chord?" He said, "Well, just listen to it and figure it out."
God,
You know?
because I was under the impression that you were like this protege of like Lauren Scott, like he was giving you these lessons and like feed you all this stuff, and so
No, but he was giving me the best lesson possible. Is like find your own process to come up with solutions to problems. The problem is I can't hear F7 over E7 when I'm 16 years old because I just don't know how that like Stravinsky kind of crunch sounds because I just have no experience. But he's like, well, we're going to go play like Record Me or a blues in F. Like start listening simple. And then you'll get to that crunchy stuff. It will become such second nature, just as the way we're having this conversation. You and I, in the last 13 minutes, haven't thought about any of the words we've used to talk to each other, right? And I think a lot of people get hung up on the theoretical side of the process and learning the names. And you do, it's like a baby, right? You can't look at a baby and say, well, okay, not going to talk to you until you know all the names of all the like, verbs and adjectives. You don't. You just talk. You just converse. And I think that's something that he did. Whether he knew it or not, I don't know. Like sometimes when I was young, I used to think he was just being mean. He's just like, oh, I don't want this kid to learn too quick because he's gonna like steal my gigs or something. But of course, that wasn't it. That was just me being pissed off that he wouldn't show me certain chords. And but yeah, he let me record everything and really, like, I would go hang out at his house, but we were both like juggling fans, so we would like do juggling shit together. Not we would maybe listen to some music, but every time I asked him like, oh, can you show me this? He was like, forget it. It's awesome.
Well, that must obviously is where you got the transcribing bug from, you know, because you're like a transcribed monster.
Well, I saw his. It was a little more compact, his one, but it was thick. And I only saw one of them. I'm sure there were many. And he kind of went like this once to me. He went and showed me a bunch of stuff, and I just went, oh. It was like the box of gold was opening. And I said, yo, can I photocopy that? He's like, get the hell out of here like this, you know? But that was the first time I saw someone making their own notes, you know? And he said, why would you want to have all of my stuff? First of all, it wouldn't make sense to you because it's my shorthand. And second of all, these were the things that I liked, that inspired me. Like, you need to find the things that inspire you to push you to do the work. Because if there isn't anything to push you to do the work, you probably aren't that serious about it, you know? Which is another good point to bring up in all of this. Like, I am on the psychotic end of focused in this thing. So as much as I'm a proponent of it, I say, hey, this is really important. I say also be aware of where you are at, whoever I'm talking to or clinic or whatever, maybe giving a lesson. I'm like, be really aware. Like if you want to play like covers of Yes, for instance, like do that. Don't get hung up on like, oh, I should transcribe John Coltrane and Alan Holdsworth and all these things. Like put it in context, ask yourself questions and answer those questions honestly. Yeah. And then you'll just have the most fun, you know. I think that's the most important
thing. So important, isn't it? Because, like, people always say, "Oh, what do I need to be doing? What do I need to be doing?" And if you don't have a passion for it, then
Yeah.
it's a losing battle, really. Because I mean,
Yeah.
it's like somebody saying, like a jazz musician saying, "Oh, I need to learn this Cannibal Corpse stuff. I want to get into death metal. What do I do?" And then it's like, what lines do I do from, what
Right.
scales do you use? And it's like, listen to the
Yeah.
stuff. Do you listen to death metal? No.
Right.
Well,
Yeah. And some of my best teachers, like, I had actually very few teachers, to be honest, and very few. Like, I think I actually took, I don't know if you know the bass player Jeff Gascoigne, great bass player in the UK. I did have some lessons, like official lessons with him. But the best part of those lessons were him saying, well, here's a list of things I really loved. You might like them, you might not, but here's a starting point. Here's a reference point. It wasn't like you must transcribe this Wayne Shorter solo. It was just, these are some cool things, And it was really different as well. He would give me like Wayne Shorter and then Michel and Degacello.
all right.
Like there was a real range there. He's like, look, there's all this stuff out there, like explore, like curiosity. Like my two favorite words are curiosity and necessity. Like, are you curious enough about it that you love it more than anything else, so you'll just do the work no matter what? And is it necessary in your life that you'll never feel like you wasted your time?
Yeah.
You feel like you are fulfilling this thing, this burning desire. So I like to keep those two words in the forefront. I'm not a guy who has like statements up on the wall or any of this kind of stuff. I don't know. Some people like, exactly, affirmations. Thank you. I should probably just put the word affirmations up there so I remember the damn word. That might help me. But yeah, I like to keep a couple of things like that at the forefront of my mind. And for everything I forget, I write it down,
Yeah. You've inspired me with that, because like I do a lot of transcription and I kind of do a lot of transcription work as well, like doing, freelance things. And
Sure.
I do write things down, when I'm doing it, but I really love your idea of having and Lawrence's idea of having a proper, book full of them that you've made, because they just get thrown away, or I'll be putting them straight into Finale Sibelius or something, and then they end up in a folder somewhere, the stuff that I've written down. But I love that idea.
This is so much easier to get to, like
I'd be on
I just, like,
pen
right
and paper as well.
Literally just at arm's length on my piano here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 of them. There are dozens in here, but I've got that many that close. And I can literally open it up and find something from 15 years ago and be like, oh, I remember that. That was awesome. And there I am for a week, potentially,
It's like keeping a diary, isn't it?
Big time.
And then going back.
It's scary at times, actually.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary. You look like, whoa, I was really into that. Oh, dear. Like...
Yeah. Well, your improvisation, I always describe as being, or I describe you as being like a great melodicist, because as opposed to just being, some people that solo on bass, not naming names, but sometimes it just becomes shredtastic or just becomes kind of noodling or for the sake of it. You're very, very purposeful. I know that it's instinctive. I know that it's not that you're thinking of it, but very, very purposeful with melody, that you're actually creating melodies, no matter how kind of out there they become. And it's very vocal with the way, and I know that you scatter with it as well, and that possibly has an effect. But I'd not thought about this until today. I've been trying to put my finger on it as to what it is that what it reminds me of. And do you know what? I figured it out.
Tell me, because I want to know.
Some of the melodies that you play, that your melodic improvisation has got very much a bit of Sting's vocal phrasing about it. I know that there's a lot of other jazz soloists, it could be anything, but in that vocal, am I right in thinking that? Is that an influence on you?
So, yeah, I mean, huge influence on me. Like Sting's music, his melodic sensibility. And there are two things you say there then. So Sting, 100%, I agree with you. I don't think I've thought about it like that for a long time, because I've just been in the middle of listening to his music basically my entire life. from the 80s when the Police was still around and I was just alive and my dad would have been playing me that stuff to, right now to hit The Ship or whatever his last, cardigan and sweater wearing album was. I don't know, with a lute or some shit. It's still him at the end of the day. Like I can listen to Roxanne or the Lute stuff and I still hear the identity. I'm sure you do too. And then the other word you used was purposeful. And purposeful, and I like the way you phrased it as well, not purposeful as in like thought out or playing licks, but purposeful in the overall concept. The use of the word purposeful in a bigger sense, like kind of zoomed out, bigger picture sense. And it's my wife, Chelsea, a great bass player, and we were at, she really highlighted it to me a couple of years ago. We were at, Bass Player Magazine used to have this event called Bass Player Live at SIR, the rehearsal studios in LA, big weekend event, lots of clinics and kind of like London Bass Guitar Show kind of vibe, right? And we were standing there listening to, at the back of the room, in the big performance room, listening to, no names here, but listening to a bass player. And she said, wow, so that's what it is. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, bass players come to these events, and whether you can call it like these events or a point where they solo, where they go away from the role of the bass, and they feel like they have to now become something they are very much not. Yeah. For the purpose of the event or for the purpose of the moment as a soloist. And most bass players, just the basic nature of the instrument, have not spent an equal amount of time working on both of those things. They've spent 98% of their time, as they should, listening to Jameson and Pino Palladino and Duck Dunn and John Entwistle and Geezer Butler and all the rest. And then suddenly you want to be Charlie Parker for, 5 choruses. It doesn't make any sense. So that when you say that, like, it does become like shreddy, because it's simply, I think, about time and about intent in the process. And most people's process, I switched from classical guitar to bass because there were more gigs for bass players. Yes, Lawrence inspired me, but as soon as I figured it out, I was like, oh, classical guitar, there's 60 years of pain and not working. And bass, wow, there's a lot of gigs for bass players. And so I was like, this is a no-brainer. I'm going with bass. I love it. And off we go. And most bass players work. You know what I mean? Most bass players are not soloists. Most bass players work. Most bass players work on a ton of different music, occupying a certain portion of the mix, certain range of the mix in the low end, below the 5th fret. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. This is just how it is, So I think, number one, once I'd heard Jacko, and once I'd have realized like how powerful that was, number one, I learned every note I could find on every record and played it exactly with the album. And then I haven't listened to it since. I realized it was so powerful, and I heard so many other bass players that was so close to that. I was like, oh, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be Jacko, and I don't want to be the person who copies him. And in getting away from Jacko and not yet getting to Jameson, there was like a period of like not yet getting to the masters of the Carol Kays, the Michelle and Degacellos of the bass. There was that little period of hearing melody. And I was always a fan of pop music, and I'm a horrible singer, but I'm like singing in the shower. Like I like melodies. I love Sting, like you so rightly said. And there was that little period that pushed me more on the melodic side initially than the bass side. And I think that was hugely kind of pivotal moment for me in terms of what I ended up loving and having a passion for checking out and transcribing. This right here that I'm working on is a Lenny Tristano piano solo, for instance. It's totally out. It's not going to get me any gigs as a bass player. No. But it's also like I know very few people who are sort of willing to do that kind of work. And this is not like I'm better than you or anything. It's just different. It's like I really want to be very clear about that. It's not some elitist ideal. It's like it's just different. And I don't think people understand the amount of repetition you have to go through in the transcribing, especially in the listening, to be a soloist or to be able to improvise melody that freely. And I think it's that freedom I've always loved and strived for, and maybe that is the reason I'm able to do it as fluidly as I can. And I'm not even on the spectrum yet. I wish I could do it way better. So I'm glad it comes across as being, something worth listening to, and just know it's something I'm always kind of constantly working on.
Well, with the avoiding Jacko thing, which I think is fairly obvious. I was actually going to say that just before you mentioned it, because you're not like Jacko. It's like so...
No.
There's so many bass players that you listen to, and you can hear Jacko, from the harmonics through to the phrasing, just the soloing phrasing, the pentatonics, all of that bit.
Well, listen to Richard. The sound, don't get me wrong, Richard Bona is all universe level musician. But the bass playing is so close to Jacko, I see that as like 2% of the value of Richard's thing, and the 98% of the value in what Richard does is the singing and the writing and the music and all this other originality and vibe that he brings to it. But yes, massive, sorry to interrupt you, but massive kind of Jacko influence, and that is not unique to him. There are a lot of people that sound like
and
that.
There's amazing players, obviously, but but it's really obvious with you, from your tone through to everything, and I think definitely with the phrasing, but also I've got a feeling that you've probably avoided transcribing some of the soloists that a lot of people stereotypically do, because every time you talk about the guys that you're transcribing, like you said there, Lenny Tristano, there's like a bunch of guys that you transcribe, whereas there's so many people that go, I'm going to transcribe bird solos. And that's it. It's like they're straight to Charlie Parker, and then and they'll move a little. It's kind of the cliche in the same way that if somebody says they're going to learn classical music, then they'll learn Bach. But it sounds like you've not even delved in. I know you've probably done a fair bit of Charlie Parker, but you don't sound like stereotypical Charlie Parker kind of bebop lineage.
Well, I think that like Bach in classical music, Charlie Parker is a massive part of the history of our music. Not it's not my music. It's the music I am linked to and is a part of my listening upbringing, so to speak. But I mean, I probably have a book with 30 Charlie Parker solos in here somewhere. I couldn't actually tell you where it is because it's like been that long. That was like 20 something years ago. That was the first stuff I transcribed. That was some of the stuff Lawrence did. I asked him, like, what did you transcribe? And he said, I transcribed some of this and this and this. He did give me pointers of stuff he had done. I was transcribing Charlie Parker early on, Dizzy Gillespie, Bud Powell, like all the bebop guys. But I also... I don't know how, actually. Maybe it's just curiosity. I've always been quite, I don't think proud. That sounds egotistical, but I've always been happy, let's say, that my curiosity has always pushed me like through the next barrier. You know what I mean? And I never got, I hate being comfortable. Like two things. I love to work super hard, and I hate being comfortable. My wife thinks I'm totally nuts as a result. You know what I mean? And it's not conducive sometimes with a happy household because I'm just like, I'm buried in this shit sometimes, But I love those two things. I've always just pushed through like, well, what's next? To me, there always has to be the next thing, And if I can't find the next thing, maybe I've put 1% of equity in my own bank of trying to be the next thing. You know what I mean? I'm always trying to find bankable equity to be like, okay, what can I do that I don't hear? Or how can I take these three components that are like this and put them like this and like this, or completely mess with them and make them a little different and unique. So and I think also I got lucky in terms of when I did what I did. I mean, I don't know because I didn't do it any other way, but from my experience, I know that when I went to the Royal Academy of Music in London, for instance, I was around a couple of key people that opened my ears and eyes to, like, one person had been in the US already and had like all these like kind of rare, kind of unknown-ish crisscross recordings and fresh sound, new talent, and these small emerging jazz labels that had at the time relatively unknown people on them, people that are household names like Chris Potter and people like that are super household names now, but like hipping me to a Red Rodney album that Chris Potter played on when he was super young, for instance, and just being like, holy shit, like this is, so having that, then going to Berkeley and being really good friends and still to this day with the tenor saxophone player Walter Smith, who in his dorm had this huge steel chest of CDs that was basically my private library. He would just give me stuff like, oh, you should check out John Gordon, and you should check out this new Kenny Garrett record, and all this stuff. So, and my roommate was Sebastian de Crome, who was Jamie Cullum's drummer with Jeff Gascoigne back in the day, now lives in the UK. And he is the encyclopedia of the history of jazz. He would come in my bedroom at night, like 3 a.m, slap a record on and say, who's the tenor player? And I'd be like, oh, it's Joe Henderson. Who's the bass player? Oh, that's Leroy Vinegar. He would do like blindfold test at 3 a.m. in the most extreme, like military style boot camp conditions. And I loved him for it. Like this was like Berkeley wasn't, the actual lessons at Berkeley was some of the dumbest shit I've ever been a part of. There's a 2 and a 5 and a 1. Oh, fantastic. But the community and the network was gold. Like that was depleted uranium. It was multi-platinum. It was just the greatest thing ever to be around those people. So I can't even remember how we got onto this. Oh, transcribing, right? But just being, okay, I'll wrap it up. Being fortunate to be around some people who really had their shit together way more than I did and exposed me to what I consider, like, for me anyway, the right things, the things that piqued my curiosity at the right time to push me even further. Like Lionel Lueke, for instance, we were there at school together. Like all of these amazing musicians. Well, Lionel's from Benin, so suddenly I'm exposed to all this West African stuff. And my friend Ferenc Nemeth from Hungary, you know, and like just unbelievable melting pot of styles and of sounds that just kept my curiosity fully loaded, you know. And I didn't want to sound like the next bass player. I didn't want to sound like all the people who sound just like Marcus Miller or just like Victor Wooten or just like Stanley Clarke, you know. 3 heroes of mine, 3 originators, 3 innovators. But let's leave it with them, you know. I don't want the million other people that copy Vic, you know, sort of note for note, you know. It's,
well, I don't want a lot of people that are watching this that have never seen you before. Not that there'll be that many of them, but I don't want them to all just think that you're just some, like, bebop soloist. For anybody out there that's not seen Janek, I'd advise them to go look up on YouTube some of the duets of him playing with Jojo Mayer, because it's so far removed from the jazz improv. Ties into what I wanted to ask you about time, because you always talk about tone and time. It's like your big thing.
Yeah, time and sound.
Yeah, and sound. And effects are obviously quite a big part of that. I mean, I know that obviously your hands do most of it, but
right.
You do use effects a hell of a lot with that stuff. And yeah, there you go. Yeah. I mean, how do you get... Because some of these sounds that you get, I know that there's people that use sounds a lot, like the Steve Lawsons of this world that will really, that are like alchemists, you know, where they'll create these crazy soundscapes and things. But you've got these real usable kind of, like with all the bit crushers that you use and some of that stuff. How do you just put these things together and see what works?
Well, there's some method to it, but like all my kind of pedal nerd friends, like I'm sure you know the channel Pedals and Effects, Juan Alderete, great bass player, really good friend of mine. And then of course, you know, Tim LaFave, my great friend and, you know, collaborator on a ton of my records, John Davis, for instance. You know, we're all the pedal nerd gang. And I think John probably knows the most, like technically out of all of us, because he's a ridiculous studio engineer. He understands sonic range and he understands what pedals actually do. I think probably Tim is like second on that list, but he's definitely moving more into the weirdness category. And then Juan, I'm not even putting myself on that list. And then Juan is like super weird. And I'm more towards Juan's concept of like getting a pedal, turning it on, turning everything up to 11 and seeing what happens. You know, of course, we all employ some of those like similar gain structure and signal path the rules or ideas. You know, you kind of like compression and preamp up front and some octave and then fuzz and modulation, reverb, delays, looper, that kind of basic pattern. But then, you know, I like putting a delay into a fuzz pedal, for instance. You know, like you know, and let me see if I can move the camera around just a little bit. and you'll see this bad boy right here, the Helix rack. So I'm also doing like stuff digitally, and now I'm with a couple of preamps, and so I'm just always experimenting with that stuff. It's like there's sort of nothing that's off limits. I'm in a unbelievably fortunate position now, especially with the Pedal Studio series on YouTube, that people are sending me a bunch of stuff, so I do get to try some crazy things I would otherwise be completely out. They would be out of my budget, because that stuff gets a little bonkers after a while. But it's also amazing to me that like I could go do JoJo's gig with this like let me unplug this with this like BB bass preamp and an OC2.
Yeah.
Like I could totally do the Jojo Mayer Nerve gig with those two pedals, no problem. So it doesn't have to be baller and bombastic. And in general, I'm just a big fan of experimentation. Especially recently, I have this year with for anyone watching this way in the future, it's 2021. We're recording this 1st of March, and I'm putting out a single a month this year. And a lot of that is, I'm at home, I'm on my own, I don't have other musicians. A lot of that is based around sound design with pedals, and I have the time to do that right now. Like we have this amazing amount of time. Like I talked earlier about it being like kind of psychologically a little bit of a head fuck, but at the same time, we're afforded this experimentation period that perhaps we will never get again in our lives. Which is pretty crazy. So that's where I'm at with the time and sound with the pedals. But it's the input to the pedal and knowing how to push a pedal and whether your bass is in passive or active, and the touch you use when you have an envelope filter, and how you have the threshold and the attack set, and like all these little details, of which, like, if any super Gwizdala nerd out there, go back 15 years, my standard go-to quote was like, I'm not a gear guy. This is what I always used to say. I said, I know nothing about it. I'm not a gear guy. Sorry, I'm the wrong guy. Go and ask someone else about pickups and pedals. Here we are 15 years later. I'm like taking these things apart and like changing, I wish I was slightly more technically minded so I could build pedals. I'd love to have my own pedal happening, for instance. So it's been a big shift. And again, it's a fascination and curiosity thing. And I like Brian Eno. I like John Hassel, Niels Petter Molver, Arve Henriksen, Matthias Eich, like Phil Dizak, who played on my last album, trumpet player. I like a lot of these trumpet players and a lot of experimental music. And I can't get that just with playing.
Yeah.
They're not really going to happen. I need some stereo reverbs and some fuzzes and some programmability. So it's kind of, again, out of necessity and curiosity, my two favorite words, in order to make new music.
Yeah.
You said earlier on, I'm not like the bebop guy, right? Like I don't just rip bebop solos. And if you look at my discography, there are kind of important parts. Like It Only Happens Once, for instance, a record we did in 2012, like you said, playing with JoJo. So JoJo's on half that record. That was a big departure sonically from Live at the 55 Bar, for instance, or Mystery to Me, or some of the more kind of standard records I made. So it's always been important to experiment and try and be different with that.
It's
stuff.
worth mentioning your albums as well, because that was one of the first times I heard you. I can't remember how I ended up with it, but it was one of your earlier albums. And like you've got quite a few albums out now. I mean, there's quite a few.
13, I think.
Yeah, and
yeah,
I've seen you document a little bit about how you're writing, what you do with your writing process, and it's very much bass orientated. A lot of it, isn't it? Because you actually do a lot of you'll sometimes do the chordal thing, and then you'll develop the harmony, and then do the melody over top. But do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I mean. Well, it's so different, right? So the album I just mentioned was completely improvised, for instance. There was like there was nothing, no preconceived idea, I don't think, on any of that. And we recorded for I guess the idea was that we had done a show with two drums, with Mark Juliana and with Jojo Mayer, plus Oz Noy and John Ellis. And the idea was to kind of record that way with two drums in the studio. And then scheduling conflict, Jojo could make one day and Mark could make the other. And I had to do one and one. So that was really the only concept behind that. But then you go into like the Union, which we just did. And that was very much like, I spoke to John Patitucci produced it. And I spoke to John ahead of time, and we like set the date and we set the band. And then I had then I knew who I was writing for. So then it wasn't really a question of like melody, groove, harmony, like that combination. It was just like, I hear this sound and that's what I'm going to write for. So I think for the most part, it's been like that. Like my first album, Mystery to Me, was all the music was written for Michael Brecker to be on the album, but that's when he got really sick and he couldn't do the recording. So it was ended up being Mark Turner. So I actually had to rewrite most of the music because they're such different musicians. So I'm more thinking about the musician that's going to play it than I am the actual notes. I think that's the biggest overwhelming concept, regardless of how dense the composition is or how, whether it's completely improvised. Did an album in Sweden with a German guitar player and a Swedish drummer, Morgan Agren and Alex Gunja, called Snow Guard about 6 or 7 years ago. And that was completely improvised, but totally different from It Only Happens Once. Like just such different sonic landscapes, but conceptually there was a concept there. We had an ensemble, a sonic concept with which to compose in real time with. So yeah, it's ever changing. What's happening right now with La Herencia? It was the first single that came out last month. I have a new single coming out this week, I think, which is just being mixed, and you're gonna hear like it's again different. It's me. Like you can hear melody and sensibilities of what I've been working on for the past 25 years, but it's very different. I'm not such. We had this great discussion last night. Did a little Instagram live, and I asked the audience, like, can you make a list of I said you definitely can't make 50 bass players, right? That are all universe. Can you make 40? I don't think so. 30 is a real challenge. Yeah. To come up with 30 bass players who are artists, who write, who have output, proof of concept, who have done something new and original. I didn't put myself on that list at all, but like, John Patitucci, Gary Willis, like that real next level legend. And when I put my little list together, what they all had in common was like a great compositional concept that had evolved, and they hadn't just made the same record over and over and over and over again, which a lot of people do. Like I love Marcus Miller, but there are a lot of similarities between his records. You know what I mean? Even though I put him on that list because I think he's such an innovator and a ridiculously great musician. And Patitucci, wow, what a range. Mistura Fina or Brazilian stuff, Another World, ton of African stuff. His jazz things are different within each other. I think that like everyone gets a little bit bogged down in the minutia of like social media and short form, 15 to 60 second form of content. And I think you have to go a little bit longer than that to sort of fulfill a vision or a sound that you hear.
Your albums have moods, I think. I think that each one has its own mood. Like they all have their own vibe. I think that's how I describe them. Like I was listening back to them before this again, and it was the first time I'd properly listened through the Union, and I mean it's beautiful album. I mean the playing on that is just from the ensemble playing in that is just
Those guys are a dream to play with, But it's interesting you say that. I take that as a massive compliment because the pretty much the only thing I'm looking for when I go make an album is the cohesiveness of the moment. And I'm not trying to spend 2 years making a record. I don't want to start a record in 2021, finish it in 2023 when I might have like 2 kids, be living in a different country, like anything could happen. Like it's not when it comes out, it's not an honest representation of the musical moment. So I'm really a fan of the process being very short. My first record, rehearse Wednesday, record in one take, top to bottom in front of a studio audience on Thursday, mixed Friday, took Saturday off, mastered Sunday, and by Monday it went to the press to be pressed. And I got on a plane to go to Europe, and a week later the CD showed up in Germany for me to sell.
Blimey.
Like I'm a fan of the short form, but I take that as a big compliment, the cohesiveness, because that's always the main concept is the is to have that representation of the moment.
I mean, you touched on social media there. I was going to ask you about that because one of those hats that I mentioned earlier about, you've got a lot of different hats. One of them is the online persona, and you've got your big channel. You've got all the different stuff that you put out there. I mean, it's like a gold mine for anybody that's wanting to, especially people that wanting to learn improvisation or how to practice, no matter what the style. I mean, there's stuff in there.
That's very important. Is like forget about the way I play. I really try and say, like, it's about you and your process, and everyone is different. Everyone's unique. And I try and drill down to as many concepts as I can, so someone goes, oh, that's me. Like, I want someone to find their identity and be like, oh, I love that. I can totally get on board with that concept.
Well, you're like the bass version of David Goggins or something. You've got like, it's like you watch you like hammering away, like, it's like, okay, I'm practicing again. And like, sometimes I'll sit and watch your practice sessions. And I'm like, man, and I'm like, I feel like a loser because I'm actually not in a bad way, but like, it makes me think, oh, why am I not practicing? And I've got, where's my bass? And it's really inspiring and motivating from that. Like Mr. Motivator, it's you've got that going on. And so you've got that, obviously, that's that's a part of that. But you've got your Instagram thing going on and all that. Sure. But what do you think? I mean, you're probably one of the only people that I'm going to talk to on these interviews that's got an opinion on it in the same way that I probably would. What do you think of the modern sort of social media side of all this? Because social media has become such a big... in everybody's lives, it's become such a big thing. It's become a big thing in all walks of every profession, even. And like in music, it's become something. But I have even though I'm a part of if it wasn't for it, I wouldn't be speaking to you right now. And but
likewise.
Yeah. And but there are elements of it that I'm really wary of, being sort of on the inside of it and seeing how people can, I don't know, I have a bit of a bad take on it at times, but I was wondering what you thought.
Mine is probably no less bad on a lot of levels, and being wary of it is incredibly healthy, I think. And also, like, I think it's good to understand there are people that are going to be too young to understand it because they don't remember and weren't in the middle of it at the time. Maybe they were conscious of it, but how it's changed. Not only has it changed from analog to digital. Let's just talk about that for a second. Like, the 90s are no longer, gigs aren't the same. The way you promote your music isn't the same. The way you record your music isn't the same. The barrier to entry is basically non-existent anymore because everyone can do it in their phone anytime they like. So that's one big change. Let's look at the changes within social media itself. Back in the day, I remember when MySpace was the thing, right? And that gave me so much optimism and hope. Because one of the things on that platform was, I don't know if you remember this, but you had your kind of profile and people would list influences. And they would have a little box with all the things. And that was a searchable option. So I would search out Pat Metheny, Gil Evans, Jaco Pastorius, and I would like add these people as friends. I built like 175,000 followers on MySpace and booked world tours off the back of it because it was literally communicating with the right people who responded, yes, I approve of your communication, and yes, I want to, because I'm interested in what it wasn't this kind of mass diluted bullshit of advertising yet. There wasn't really the algorithm. So that was like a massive change. It started off really optimistic and worthwhile for musicians. And then it is what it is now. There are a couple of things which we'll get to, of course. I'm not just going to throw it away. And there are a couple of things about this as well. There is also the whole digitization of recorded music, Napster and piracy and all LimeWire and all this bullshit. And the fact that the record labels didn't invest into the future of what is now streaming. They fought it. They saw a perceived revenue loss in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they fought and sued to try and recoup this money that didn't even fucking exist. They tried to recoup that, and they destroyed themselves. And lo and behold, now 20 years later, they're back in the mix, owning all the rights and working with the streaming companies and screwing the musicians again.
I know.
Right? So they've screwed us twice now. Now, don't worry, I'm going to get to something that I think I don't understand fully yet, but I think might be a massive solution for this in just a second. But then to your social media point, what it has done is, to how I see it and how I see and hear, more importantly, that's it right there. It has meant people listen with their eyes.
Yeah.
That's it. It's meant people listen with their eyes, and their attention span has been diminished so viciously to less than 2 seconds. I talked to Adam Neely about this, and we were talking about, I don't know if we did it in my interview with him or just on the phone afterwards, but the whole thought of don't put music in the front of an Instagram video because people are still going to still trying to press the screen to turn the volume on. Like you should start the music at 2.5 seconds? Should you start it at 2? These are the things people are thinking about. Like when that's what you're thinking about, the music is now not even secondary. It doesn't even exist. You have to dress like a clown or a homeless person in order to get attention. You know, attention is probably the most fundamentally important word for the artist or creator side, because it's just a big competition to get attention. You know, you have so many massive channels that's all they do. And it's all basically diluted down to the same kind of like neo soul guitar lick or super shred lick, pick your lane, whatever it is. It's all bullshit. It's got nothing to do with music at all. So I think that is an unfortunate side effect of the algorithm of a music. Let's talk about jazz for a second, just because that's more my passion and what I know about. A music that was created by radical people for radical people has now become something that is created by conservative people for conservative people, and all controlled by essentially an advertising company, whether it's Google or Facebook. That's it. You know, like there's that old thing of like if you're not paying for it, then you are the product. Like that sentiment. Like Facebook isn't the product, we are. You know what I mean? I don't think people get that. I think people still see it as a tool, but they're really being fooled into destroying whatever creative sort of output was left. Now, I did say I thought I had maybe a solution for that. And I don't know enough about it. I'm even hesitant to talk about it in an interview, but I'm so passionate about it. It's NFTs, non-fungible tokens. We're talking about blockchain and like modern technology, essentially, and smart contracts, and being able to write your royalty structure and trading and resale of a digital item, i.e. a recording, a picture, something you painted. So something digital holds value in the long term. Now, like I said, I'm like a few weeks into the research of this. I don't know enough about it, but it does seem like the technology is heading in that direction. And you can mint things, digital things, and write your parameters into the smart contract so it's there forever. And kind of of course, you have to have an audience. And the platform and the way an audience is going to use that and buy that has to be so simple that it's like Spotify or iTunes or Amazon, you know, like, so I think that will be the big hurdle, but maybe there is a little hope. But social media, oh man, I use it, you use it, we all use it, you know what I mean? It's a big component of our advertising, for want of a better word, you know what I mean? Like I sell books as a result of putting content on YouTube. I don't put content on YouTube to sell books. And I think that is probably the difference between a lot of people, is that they are trying to game the system. You know, that's their focus. That's their primary objective. I'm doing it because I love what I do and I like to share that. And if I make some money out of selling books as a byproduct, awesome. You know, I'll run ads if I want to sell books. You know what I mean? As we all can. We can run ads on Facebook and Instagram. But the actual content creation, I think you got to be honest about where it's coming from. You know, I think maybe honesty and originality really get pushed to the side. And the barrier to entry is zero now. Yeah. How many times do you get something in your feed that you're like, this person cannot play music? They literally can't put their fingers in the right place to play the Stevie Wonder bass line. And there they are with 1 million followers. And you're like, what?
I know. And the awful thing that I found recently is that because, I mean, me, you, like a bunch of people that are in this with all the online thing that might have run ads and all that, you kind of get to see behind the curtain. So, you know, like there's all the Social Dilemma came out recently on Netflix that talks about this. But I've been talking about that for the past, like, quite a few years now, because I've seen it happening where you get this with every part of the internet, be it conspiracy theories. I mean, we see it in politics, we see it in everything. And you get, because anybody can have a platform, anybody, even a schmuck like me, you know, anybody can go on there, right? So now some people might be, you know, it might be good information, but then anybody can be a guru figure. Anybody can go out there, they can start up something, and then people listen. And the problem with it is that the well, it's not even just the algorithm. Well, it is algorithmic, but the fact that it's going to feed you more of what you like. It's just this echo chamber, and I think for musicians especially, it's quite dangerous if you're trying to learn. If you're like a student of music, and you're looking at one particular thing, and then you're only seeing that. You're not getting every side. You're not getting the different sides of the story.
Exactly. And it has diluted the education in general of the audience. Like, regardless of whether you're like a bass student and you want to learn, or a violin student you want to learn something, it's diluted the sensibilities, like just the taste factor and the knowledge. Like, there are hugely successful artists and bands right now that we all know, that all come up in our feed every day, that are a diluted version of something that happened 40 years ago. And the audience don't know any better, because all they get is smashed over the head with band X, and they don't hear Weather Report and Headhunters and the shit that actually started it. So the audience, like, I don't want to offend anyone, because I know that there are obviously exceptions to that rule, and a lot of those people thankfully come to my shows, and I get to meet them and talk to them, and they interact with me online. So I know that's not 100%. But the reason some of these people have millions of followers and massive careers without actually doing anything original is exactly what you're talking about, being hit over the head by the algorithm. And it really, like, I look at the classical world for comparison, and somebody brought this up yesterday, saying that, well, there are still like goons in the classical world that play like this diamond-studded violin, like Two-Set Violin, the channel. I don't know if you know those guys. Yeah, so they kind of expose some of these people, like Sacrilegious Boy with the Flight of the Bumblebee, that whole meme thing. But it's true, there are some people like that who have like fake bullshit and they have a big career. But for the most part, if you want to be even considered for the audition for the LSO or the Cleveland Symphony or the LA Phil, to be considered for the audition, to even get in the room with 100 other people for the one place, your hands have to have bled at some point. You work so hard. This is not like over.
No, it's not exaggerating at all. No,
not exaggerating at all. This is like, literally, you have to be in the practice room 10 hours a day, and you know this from age, like, okay, maybe you have crazy parents and it's like 2 years old you get into it, but maybe not. Maybe you're like 8 or 9. You're like, oh, I love the violin. You know it from the age of 10. Like, oh, if I want to do this, this is the path. The path is completely defined. There's one map. The barrier to entry is all the way up here. And in what we do in our world, in jazz and pop and commercial music and being a side man or woman, there's no barrier to entry. It's just like, oh, you look good. Yeah, come and do the gig. That's it. You own a bass? Oh, you got the gig. Like, it's literally like that. And you're like, are you kidding me? If we applied the same work ethic and passion that like some of those, and concepts that some of those classical musicians did, we'd have a resurgence of original music and an audience who was just like spoilt for choice of like, holy shit, I'm almost overwhelmed here. There's so much good stuff going on. But it's kind of mediocre what's happening right now. I hate to be like grumpy old man here, because I'm now in my 40s, but it's a weird place to have come from the analog through the transition and fully into the digital, and now be in a place where there are so few people from where I started that nobody really cares. Like, oh, they don't understand even. They're like, what are you talking about? You went to live shows and that was mainly how you learned. Like, what do you mean? It's all on YouTube. Like, that's the argument now, which is crazy. What's a CD? Bro, what's a CD? Like, I don't have a CD player in the house. Like, that kind of thing. It's pretty crazy.
I'm kind of optimistic in some ways. I think that things might, everything goes through phases and changes. Everything's cyclic and stuff. I think that there will probably, maybe even COVID might even bring about some resurgence in something. Who knows? Because it might be like, post World War II, when there was a bit of in the 50s, when everybody's like getting a bit of a buzz on.
Absolutely.
It might be kind of like that. But I by the same token, like with not just YouTube but social media, you see a lot of there are a lot of brilliant people. I mean, for all
Yes.
the sort of, like the sort of also rans that are in there, but
Yeah.
you've got people like Jacob Collier coming through, and all these people and the people like Adam Neely actually that are doing a lot of things in trying to shed light on other areas of things that you might not normally get.
Sure.
And I don't know. I like to try and be optimistic with it because I'm so cynical when it comes to it on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis. But
Yeah.
I'm trying to be as optimistic as I can.
And as am I. I mean, my whole like diatribe of like everything sucks
Yeah.
aside, I'm definitely positive on it. Because I think there's a space for the top. There is a space for the top end still. I think it's maybe. I think it's not harder or less. It's not harder or easier to get there in terms of the work you have to do to be honest about your ability and to operate in that space at that altitude. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult now than it was to cut through the noise, the general noise of social media and that kind of stuff. But I'm definitely optimistic that there is still a space there. And an audience, maybe not as big as they were 20, 30 years ago, but there's still definitely an audience there. I experience that audience when I go and play what I consider to be fulfilling and very honest music. I do experience that audience who is very turned on. I'm making some generalizations there before for the masses, but that, of course, great audiences still exist. The videos I'm uploading from the last Bob Reynolds tour last year are testament to that. Like and I'm getting comments from people. Oh yeah, I was at that show and that was awesome. And like people, they do get it. It may not be on a mass adoption like it used to be in the 70s, where you'd have 5,000 people at a Weather Report concert, for instance. But I think it is there. I also think that, yes, I 100% agree with you that COVID is going to change a lot. We might get some roaring 30s kind of stuff, like even like post-Depression, post World War One era, not even 50s, but and a resurgence and clubs being the clubs that make it through this and venues being packed again. I think the hunger for live music is definitely there, which is amazingly positive. And then I think there are also going to be a lot of changes in terms of how, especially I see it through my filter, being an artist and wanting to tour as a band leader, how that whole system works. And I think that there's going to be a lot more private hire. Like if I want to play in Prague, I'm going to say, okay, I'm paying for this room for the night. No middleman, no booking agent, no nothing. As I'm taking the full risk. I'm hiring the room, I'm hiring the PA, I'm selling the tickets, and I'm also taking 100% of the profit to pay my musicians. You know what I mean? So I think there might be that kind of thing coming a little bit at least, which might open up a few more doors for people who truly believe in what they do. And also put the responsibility on the shoulders of the artist to create something that does generate an audience that they can communicate with, and control's not the right word, but have a dialogue with, and make touring happen and make shows happen and have some sort of live music career. I'm very optimistic.
Of course, that's the upside to social media, in that you have this one-on-one kind of dialogue with the audience, and also you do get exposure with things that you might not ordinarily get as well, and people sometimes I think audiences in general, as much as it's easy to think that they kind of get dumbed down, I think it's more that the actual social media is at fault rather than the actual people, because you end up being... I always like looking at the recent Queen film as being an example of this, like, because Queen were kind of obviously they were massive, but then there's a lot of people in this new generation that quite obviously hadn't even heard of them, because the thing went nuts, and I'm like, everybody knows about the whole story, what are you talking about? But like all of a sudden people are like, oh, have you heard this band Queen? And it did so well. And I think that might, given the correct, or just the right people, the right influencers, I hate that bloody word, but like
I know.
Influencers actually bringing certain things into the limelight, that it might get people interested in stuff that they might not. Zappa talks about this all the time. Did back in the 60s and that, about how back in the 60s, obviously, people took a chance more with the actual record companies and stuff, and things were a lot more eclectic and a lot more experimental, and then it kind of goes the other way, and you never know, we might be in that kind of zone.
I hope so. And it's interesting when you talk about like the Queen movie and sort of the archival element of bringing that stuff documentary style forward and saying, hey, do you realize who Bill Evans was? Like I love piano player X, Y, and Z from 2015, 18, and 2020. But do you remember who Bill Evans was, for instance, or Weather Report? For sure. And I also think maybe I'm just being nostalgic and old, and not grumpy, but nostalgic and old, perhaps, in that I quite liked the fact that there was a record label. So I don't like the way that they operated, but just the process of like somebody going out and finding talent. There was a gatekeeper. I'm on the fence about whether gatekeepers are good or not. But what social media has shown is that there are a bunch of bullshit artists, just total vapid. They're just wasting my time every time I open up one of those apps, kind of just bullshitters, complete charlatans. And there was something about like somebody from a label going like, wow, I like this Chick Corea guy. Let's give him a chance. I agree with you 100% that like they took more chances back then, like what you said Zappa was saying. But I do like the fact, I don't like the fact that they would sign a bunch of artists and then put them on the shelf and do nothing with them. There are so many shit things about the record industry. Take most of the money for a shitty little advance. Okay. We all know that. But just the concept of like, I think ECM does a really good job of that in the jazz world now. They're very discerning about like, oh, you know what? This guy, I love Shy Maestro. That's one of my favorite new artists. And his new album, Human, with Phil Dizak and the guys, man, it's unbelievable. And the care and attention to detail that they take, I think that's totally lost, because people are like making videos with their phones and recording with these shitty little digital devices. And Manfred Eicher's going to like a theater and like hanging microphones and we're going to turn the piano this way because it reflects off that balcony better. Like, where's the nuance? There you go. That's the word I've been waiting to find. Nuance is social media obliterated nuance, because you have to impress in the first 2 seconds or you don't survive. You don't beat the algorithm. So nuance is gone, and that's really sad, because nuance is also, I think, the hardest thing to attain as a musician, or as an aesthetic, as an artist, as a composer, as any of that, well,
that goes back to what I was saying about your improvisation, really, because it's the nuance in there that makes it so melodic. I said about the melodicist thing.
Sure.
It's the nuance in there, and like you were saying about with the transcriptions. Like if I'm going to transcribe one of your solos, there's going to be a lot of stuff that you can put it down. I mean, this with the transcription, with the books and stuff, that you can put the dots down. You know what those notes are. You put them down, but that doesn't tell the story at all.
Exactly, and that's something I've been talking about a lot recently. I took like a little bit of a different direction with my YouTube and with my Instagram recently. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go. Not that I ever think I was trying to bullshit anyone, but I'm gonna go really zero bullshit. I started scripting things for the first time, got a teleprompter, like I'm going to go super focused, one subject, 10 minutes, boom. And that is, I've been talking a lot about, I've been posting transcriptions that I'm working on to Instagram lately and talking a lot about that in the comments and in conversations I'm having with people, but that it is exactly that. Like people say, well, should you write it down? I'm like, well, yeah, you should write it down, because in 20 years time, you could be re-inspired by it. You know what I mean? I think that's really important. And then the next question is, well, how accurate? Because my notation's not so great. How accurate? I said, man, it's a shorthand. I've basically created my own shorthand, because exactly what you're saying, it's all in the nuance. The dots don't tell the story the way Pat Metheny lays back on 4/8 notes. You can't notate that.
You'd have to, because you could go the Steve Vai route of using nested tuplets and everything to try and do your transcriptions, but there's that's not what it is.
And then you're thinking about nested tuplets when you're reading it, and that's not what you want to be thinking about. It's like, and also the thing of the way you get, I believe anyway, the way you get to that point of having nuance and the ability, like it's hard to demonstrate without the instrument, but the ability between this and this and this and like the micro movements you can make with your fingers to create this massive range of sound. I think the way you get there is not from memory. Like Chick Corea talks about this. I heard him talking about this a while ago, saying that you don't, like, using your memory is like sight reading. So you can sight read a piece in the moment, like a piece of music, and blah 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 blah, and then you can put the music away and use your memory to sort of reread it in your mind, because you have this picture, right? You have this like theoretical and analytical
like
picture of what this was. Well, no, but the abstract thing is like, but what he was saying is like, you got to do it enough. You got to play these notes enough so you know it.
Yeah.
It's the difference between memorization and knowing. And I think nuance is knowing, like, and those details are knowing. It's the repetition. Like, I post the little videos and I post pictures of this stuff, and I make videos for YouTube. And I have a thing called the Transcription Vault at Janek's Bass Studio, where I do really break it down, and analyze it. What I don't have, what I don't give, maybe I should. This would be kind of boring for some people, I guess. But what I don't give people access to is the 17 hours that I play this for, over 3 days. Like, I might play this solo for 6 hours a day for a week, for a month. Like, that's the repetition on the path to knowing rather than memorizing. So some people are like, well, improvisation is just a series of licks. Well, licks kind of mean that you think, oh, that's lick number 453 and I can play it over these 5 chords. So, now's the time. I'll play it here. It's not. We know speech, like I talked about before. Like, we haven't thought about any of that. We just know it. It's instinctive. And I wish I knew, but I still don't know why people have that disconnect with music. And it sounds like such a cliche that, oh, music's just another language, but holy shit, it is. And it only has 12 notes, not 26 letters. And it only has like certain number of chord qualities, etc. It's like not as complex as English, for instance, not even anywhere near the nuances, but like the dialect and the accent. And I'm getting close to figuring that out. And I think a lot of it is the fact that we institutionalized the learning process, and people started making a lot of money from it, like on a university level. Like, I'm not talking about like, come to you for a lesson or come to me for a lesson or be on one of our sites or something, or a YouTube video. I'm talking about like $70,000 a year to go to Berkeley type institutionalized level. And you have to have a curriculum, and you have to put thoughts in people's heads. And I always have like the chain. And I say musical idea, performance. And if those two are the only links in the chain, that's it. There's nothing between them. But as soon as you put another link, theory, another link, analysis, another link, the more thoughts in the middle of the two things, the more kind of disconnected the performance is. So I don't know, the thoughts on those roll on every day.
Well, what you just said about that, with the kind of intuitive use of phrases, well, it's not just phrases, but the musical ideas. It's funny, this last week I did a lesson on walking, and I've had a lot of people saying nice things about it, and the thing that they like about it is exactly what you were just saying, because it was just a lesson on playing over a single chord, because a lot of people find it difficult to walk over a single chord because they run out of ideas.
Right. Run out of ideas in 2 bars.
Because they're so used to playing bloody 2-5-1s and blues. Right. And then, so I thought, right, okay, well, I'll use the vocabulary sort of analogy. And, just showing a few phrases, maybe targeting from here to here. There's a certain element of theory behind it, I guess, in the way that I do it. But the point that I was making that seemed to click with people is exactly what you just said, that you don't want it to be a lick or a line or a phrase. It's a phrase. If you put it apart, take it apart, the nuts and bolts of it, obviously, but it has to be intuitive. It has to be instinctive, that the phrase becomes, that you assimilate it, and then it just comes out of you because it's been absorbed, and you just do it over a long period of time, like you said, with the vocabulary. And I think when you put it like that, because it's something that you reiterate so many times, and it's had a real, even though I kind of thought like that before I saw you talking about that, it's really made me think about how I describe stuff in that way, because it's so bang on the money that, because anybody that's a professional musician or just a musician in general knows that, really. I mean, if you're used to playing walking bass lines, you know how they work. If you're used to improvising, you know that these things just come out of you, after all that practice. But it's not said that often. And like you said about the institutionalization of this stuff, that I suppose they have to be able to say, okay, well, you do this step, to get from here to there, and it needs to have some kind of criteria, so for marking purposes and all this kind of stuff. When in fact, it's just learning the language.
I can understand, like, when you need a curriculum for advanced mathematics, because there are specific rules, like certain things, not everything, of course, there's fluidity and art to mathematics, but certain things up into a certain level, they just work like this. That's it. These are the rules. It's not subjective. That's it. So you need a curriculum, and you have to have all of this information together to move to the next thing. Music and the arts is not like that. And I don't think there's a curriculum on earth in any institution, at least not that I've seen yet, that caters to the individual curiosity. It's a big ask. Imagine you got 3,000 students and you have to cater to 3,000 individual curiosities. I mean, if you could do that, it'd be worth the $70,000 a year to go.
I just don't think you can, because
I don't think you can, and I think mom and dad don't want to send little Timmy off to Berkeley without a curriculum. No. They don't want to. They can't justify spending $70,000 a year. Like, what are you qualified in at the end? Well, guess what? You're not qualified in anything. If you do a double major at Berkeley, you are still not qualified to be a musician. Yeah. I know. I was there. I quit early. I watched all the people that graduated, and I know where we're all at now. Like, it doesn't mean anything. And not once, not a single time, I love this statistic. I'm a big stats fan. Not once in my entire career have I been asked, can we see a diploma?
Yeah, I know.
You know what I mean? Like, get out of here. Maybe if I wanted to take a teaching gig, then there are certain rules about that, but come on.
I didn't dare tell people after I'd graduated that was at Leeds. Honestly.
Exactly. If you do, like, keep it a secret.
People that take the piss. I ended up, there was one of the gigs I was doing, there were a lot of old timers on this gig. And I was, they were like, I was pretty green, And, you get a lot of old timers that have been playing a long, long time, that have been doing all these gigs. The repertoire is like boom through the roof. There's the kind of bulletproof, and then you start making mistakes here and there. And I think on that gig they knew that I was a graduate of such and such. And if you're gonna mess up on those gigs, and those people know that, it's awful. So I just, I never let anybody know. It wasn't like I was going to brag about that anyway. I mean, we know that doesn't mean anything. But I just kept quiet. And how silly is that you can actually do a degree in music and then want to keep quiet about it?
For sure. I also think, like, we should make it very clear. I don't think I've necessarily made it that clear throughout our conversation here. We've been talking a lot at the sharp end of the stick here. We've been talking about a lot of professional situations, a lot of, like, complex situations. I think something else that gets overlooked a little bit, and maybe some people watching are like, well, that's kind of elitist, like jazz, and you have the improvisation and Lenny Tristano, like, screw it. I think context is, like, hugely key. Like, don't take me saying that Lenny Tristano is important to me, which is what I've said. I've never said it's important to everyone. Don't take that as being like some elitist bullshit. Like, everyone, because not everyone, like you said, is a professional musician. And when you said that thing about, well, professional musicians, we know how walking bass line works.
I know. Of course we do. Even that, I hate that.
Right. But we're sort of in the minority in terms of the audience that's probably watching right now. Like, some people are like, I just want to play and have fun. I want to be entertained. So there is, of course, a place for all of that on the internet. I just always say, ask yourself, like, what your goal is, and be realistic about it, and be honest with the answer. And then also ask better questions. When somebody asks me a question about music, and I'm not being a dick at all, I normally won't give them an answer, but I will try and help them phrase the question better. And when they phrase the question better, they've more often than not answered it for themselves. Yeah. because the answer doesn't have to be that complicated. It generally isn't that complicated, unless you're asking me about some analysis of, you know, Messiaen or Scriabin or something and what happened in the third trombone part. Okay, yeah, that's a little technical. But generally, the questions about, it's really not, you know, and the building blocks are pretty simple. Like we said, 12 notes in Western music, a finite number of chord qualities, range of instrument. You know, we play the dumbest instrument on planet Earth, you know, like, and even mine's, I'm sure you have more than 4 strings on some bass that you own, but even just take away that C string and it's 4 strings, it's all in parallel. You want to change key, you move your fingers half an inch. It's not the trumpet, you know, it's not the saxophone. We don't have to wake up and work on our embouchure every morning, you know. So put just context. I think context is really important through everything we've been talking about. I know this about myself. I get a little too far down the jazz lane, and it does. I listen back to some interviews. Shit, that sounds a little bit elitist, you know, and that's the last impression I want to give, because it's really just about having fun no matter what you do, right?
Than watching you with JoJo, because it's so different to what people might perceive you as. I mean, I'm not being presumptuous to think that that's what people are going to perceive you as, but like, you know, it's like you've said, it can be, you can come across as, or like we've been talking, a lot of it's about jazz and that, but like a lot of the stuff, like, through your career, you'll have done so much that's not jazz, you know, so the whole of this applies to every style.
Well, and the interesting thing is, like, I would say, I mean, now we might be reaching a tipping point, but until like 5 years ago, most of what I had done was on like a 4-string Fender bass that never made it to YouTube. Yeah. Unless I was like, you know, the Dave Letterman shows I was on are on YouTube. Like, you can search all that pop stuff, like the commercial stuff that's like out there. But the bulk of my touring career with pop musicians as a musical director, that doesn't make it to YouTube, because it's not wankety wank for 60 seconds. It's like actually doing the work and playing 300 shows and only sleeping in your own bed 11 nights in a year. Like, all of those things. You know, the video that I released this morning, I was talking about that even with a jazz thing, with a Bob Reynolds tour. I said something along the lines of, like, playing music like this is not easy. And I don't mean the notes and the songs. I mean everything that surrounds it. And like that whole part of most of the touring musicians I know, that whole part of our career is not highlighted, is not on YouTube. It's not on the highlight reel. Because it's not flashy, it's not fun, it's not sexy, it's not impressive. Yeah. It will probably put most people off the idea of being a full-time musician, because it's the reality of the work. I forget if it was Scott Henderson or Frank Gambale. I think it might have been Frank Gambale, but I'm not sure. It was one of the guitar players that played in Chick Corea's electric band who said to Chick, "You don't pay me to play this music. I'll play this music for free anytime. What you pay me for is all the bullshit of getting on and off the tour bus every day and taking flights and being on the road." And I think that's reality. So I think, you know, 10, 11 years ago, I made the conscious decision to stop touring as a sideman for pop projects and being kind of a mercenary. I did 10 years of it. That was more than enough, and decided to like work on my own thing. So I think that's why it comes across a little bit heavier on the jazz and the improvisation creative side, just because I'm a little bit farther removed from that other world.
But everything that you say about improvisation and keeping a transcription log and all that stuff could just as much apply to transcribing Jameson. You know, I mean, there's plenty of Jameson.
Oh, 100%. And I have, like, you know, I transcribe a bunch of Carol Kay on the Beach Boys and Jameson and Duck Dunn and all of these guys, you know, Wilton Felder and like all the cats. I would say Michel Ndegecello, like, it's interesting how I came to bebop through Mike Stern. Like, I heard Mike Stern playing that language with distorted guitar on a fusion record, and then went back in the history and went to Charlie Parker and Miles Davis and Dizzy Gillespie. With James Jamerson and those classic bass players, the Carol Kay from the 60s and 70s, I heard Michel Ndegecello kind of bass forward. A little Marcus as well, but Michel was my biggest influence in that sense. And I heard that bass forward, funk, pocket, groove, sound, time, that whole thing. I was like, oh, well, this is my jam. I love this. This really speaks to me. So I'm going to play to these records, Peace Beyond Passion and Plantation Lullabies, for thousands of hours. Did that. But then I also went back and, of course, Jameson and I've Been Loving You, like all the Otis Redding stuff. And just, you know, I think it's important to have those moments as well.
Well, I don't want to keep you too long. We've been talking an hour and 20 minutes already.
Oh, good. Hey, man. Yeah, and we could probably do another 2 hours, but let's maybe do another one.
Yeah,
of these
I'd love to do another
in the not
one.
too distant future.
I was
pick it up anytime.
Well, I was going to say about I can't leave without mentioning your books because, as you know, I did a review of one of your, two of your books, all the better, all the good stuff and all the better stuff. Yeah, that's the second one, isn't it?
Appreciate that. Yeah,
and
thank you.
They are so good. And I didn't. You know what? I went in it pretty cynical because I knew that. I kind of knew what it was going to be, but I thought, no, I'd seen you practicing it. And I was like, well, if it's good enough for Janek, it's damn well good enough for me. So I downloaded it, and not downloaded it, I bought them. And I started working through them, and I was like, man, it's such a simple concept in the way that you put those things in, but it really gives you something to practice. It really gives you material, even though it's stuff that, I could have sat there on my own and thought, okay, well, I'll play this line, or whatever, but it's not. It's that you've got a nice set of things, just like the Hannon books and stuff. It's like that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for the compliment. And it's like, especially with, like we realize that, and I work on these books with Chelsea. Like Chelsea does all the design and the layout and the copying. I do all the concepts and the writing. She does all that. But one thing we've talked about between us is the arc that I think is really important. Like everyone says, are these books for beginners or advanced? And I'm always like, look, if you're a beginner, pages 1 through 5, completely entry level. Like my book Chordal Harmony is a major scale in tenths. It doesn't get a lot simpler than that. And I have people who are great players still send me messages like, man, I'm still on exercise 1. You know what I mean? Like people who, so we always think about the arc, and that's something that's something that I go in with the initial concept of the book. Like these two especially, shameless plug here, but just these are more recent ones. We really go in there like, okay, first of all, I don't want to alienate people. I want to be all-inclusive from the beginning and not make it like you say, Bass Player's Guide to Pentatonics, like, oh, pentatonics. Like, I don't want it to be like, there to be any stigma with that or like, oh, shit, I got to learn theory or no reading or any of this stuff. It's like, no, it's okay. Like, this is really basic stuff and you all know. My whole thing is like, you know more than you give yourself credit for. You've listened to enough music and you have the reactive skills. Maybe you don't have the connection with the instrument yet, but instinctively you know way more than you think you do.
Especially pentatonics, because it's so applicable.
100%. Bass lines, how many great pentatonic bass lines, both major and minor, are there? And so we go kind of bass line heavy, actually, in the pentatonics books. And now we're adding things like play-alongs, and there are videos with it and stuff. So it's kind of, it's come a long way in terms of production, but that's always the concept, is to kind of be all-inclusive no matter what your level. Have a nice arc. And, of course, Chelsea makes it look beautiful, and she presents it so well. So I got super lucky, like I didn't marry her for the book skills, but holy cow, what a bonus,
But
so
also
lucky.
in these, because I've got the 251 one as well, but there's a lot of nice harmonic concepts as well, because like even little things like the 5/1 cadence and the minor key stuff where you've got the diminished run coming down into the tonic, stuff like that is like really nice stuff to play, and you're taking it chromatically or through the cycle or whatever. It's really, really nice lines.
And I always preface this stuff by saying, like, this should not be, like, the pentatonic stuff, the 251 stuff should not be your final, the material in the book shouldn't be your final vocabulary goal. It's just a way to connect the thing you're hearing on the album to your instrument and give you the tools to go and create everything that's in this book 100 times over. I always say, like, the book is just the beginning. This is my way of finding a solution to a problem and populating my practice routine with it. And it should be that for anyone reading it. Like, it's a tool. It's a tool for repetition of a concept. And hopefully that sparks you to go forwards and develop that. That's the goal.
All right, then, Janek, we'll leave it there because we'll just keep going forever. Because honestly, I've got like a bunch. I've got so many questions, and I could just keep going. Because I was thinking I'll start talking about that, and I thought, no, we'll be talking about it for bloody hours.
Well, but that's great. That happens with interviews I do all the time. 100 questions, I ask 2, and it's 2 hours later. Yeah. So but we can do it again, man, anytime. Let's do it 6 months from now and pick it up again. Yeah.